Thank you, Lily, for all you have done and continue to do for women, pay parity, and gender parity. We cannot wait to see the movie about your accomplishments. Now we'd like to talk about the men who are part of our movement, each man who is what we call an ally of her. And to discuss with these men the steps they have taken and best practices for ensuring that both men and women work together to drive true impact in gender equity and diversity, I would like to introduce Pat Shea. Pat is a serial entrepreneur, board member on multiple corporate boards, including the WBC. Pat, take it away.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Gwen. I am so excited to be facilitating the WBC's first ever Ally of Her panel. The Ally of Her is an initiative to invite men into our work, the work of the WBC. Men such as our WBC board members, advisory champions, partners, honorees, men who have made the advancement of women business leaders a priority throughout their careers. A knowledgeable woman once told me, in fact, she could be on today, Brittany Cole, whenever you're having a conversation about equity, it's always wise to include those currently in power, those who are holding the present status quo in place. The WBC recognizes that men's leadership, advocacy, and sponsorship are fundamental to our achieving equal position, pay, and power. And while recruiting great women leaders is the first step, retaining women leaders is definitely the second. Retaining women requires efforts of inclusion in creating a company culture where women are valued, respected, and able to contribute their fullest brilliance. And because frequently women are still the only women in the room, male allies are critical in developing that inclusive culture. Modeling ally-type behaviors, being sponsors, champions, amplifiers, advocates, upstanders, shifts the culture, creating an environment where all feel welcome. Let me be clear, we are not asking men to save us. We're asking men to join us, to be our allies in the pursuit of gender, diversity, and pay parity in the workplace. That's why today we've invited 5 global thinking, world-leading men to share their successful stories of partnering with women leaders and serving as allies of her. Let me first introduce Matt Carter, CEO of Aryaka, connecting enterprises across cities, countries, and clouds by delivering uncompromised application performance. David Fischette, President and CEO of GoWest Creative, helping national and international brands tell their story through live and virtual events and creative content. Damon Hininger, President and CEO of CoreCivic, providing quality corrections, detention, and residential reentry services that better the public good. Dr. Mehmood, CEO of Hevolution Foundation, a global leader focused on extending the healthy lifespan of all of humanity. And Prising, Chairman and CEO of ManpowerGroup, sharing a passion for preparing the workplace for tomorrow. Good afternoon, gentlemen. Thank you very much for joining us today. We have seen so many impressive leaders present over the past day, but this panel is no exception. I'm so excited to hear from you. So let me start with my first question. As CEO, you are responsible to drive a culture that attracts, retains, and advances the women leaders that we want in our workforce. What have you done to make that come true in the organizations you lead, and what's been most successful for you? And David, I'm going to turn it over to you, and then I'm going to ask you to turn it over to one of the other male leaders on the panel when you're finished.
Excellent. Thanks, Pat. Thank you so much for having me here. I hope my internet is good. I just got a little unstable notice, but I hope you can hear me. So our company has been around for 37 years, and our company has several, it's privately held, it's got several shareholders, but the majority shareholders, the majority of the company is still held by myself and my ex-wife, Robin, who founded the company with me. And, from the beginning, she was really the driving force of what the vision of the company could be, but also helping us form the organization and what the culture would strive for. And so having that sort of that co-owner, that partner from the very beginning has really helped shape my thinking on how to develop diverse ways of approaching work, approaching work life, and approaching workload. So fast forward to today, my C-suite, consists of 3 people. Myself as CEO, Eileen Valois, who's our Chief Operating Officer, and Amy Killett, who is our Chief Financial Officer. And having these 2 women as my daily partner in operations of the company has been invaluable because they're both strong women with incredible reputations in their given fields. And they both have a unique ability to help me see any of my blind spots when it comes to staff issues, relational issues of diversity, anything that I may need to look at from a different perspective. So I feel having those strong female leaders in the company has really been the number one attractor of other women that want a career where they can actually see a clear career path moving forward. And so in addition to that, we're constantly developing new programs, training and educating the staff, and giving them opportunities for CE courses that help them advance. But all of that is great. But I think the most important thing is that we just continue to understand that everything is fluid. We need to continue to listen to our staff and our other leaders as we develop, what the company culture looks like going forward. I'm going to send it over to you, Dr. Khan.
Thank you, David, Patricia. 3 parts to your question. How do you attract, retain, and advance women? Well, first of all, you can attract. My experience has been go out and personally recruit the candidates. There's nothing more powerful than sitting down with the candidate as the senior executive, in this case, the CEO, and saying, I need you on my team. The second piece of that is your track record. I mean, we're all very senior executives, so we have 20, 30, 40-year careers. And it's a small world. When I took over as vice chairman of PepsiCo, I had 9 direct reports. All were men, all were white, and all were engineers trained in the United States. Now, very simple statistic. 2/3 of the people who bought PepsiCo's products were women. Not one was represented in the team that designed the products, engineered the products, distributed the products, let alone sell them in. So it was easy. The rationale, go out and recruit. When I left PepsiCo as vice chairman, of my 9, 5 were women, 4 were men, 3 were from different parts of the world, 2 were of color, and since then, 3, now 4 are in C-suite or CEO positions. So, you can talk about the hypothetical. I'm just going to give you the numbers. Those numbers are your best selling point because the word gets out there. Those candidates go out, talk. And so when you need a position filled, there's nothing more powerful than saying, you want to talk to somebody to see what it's like to work for me? Here's 4 people you can talk to. And I believe you need a reference not only as the candidate, but you need a reference as the hiring person too. I think that's very powerful. And I found that I've never been shy to sort of say, hey, go talk to somebody who's worked for me. And now in terms of advancement, I think I've answered your question. And I'm sure we'll come back to it.
Thank you, Dr. Khan. That was great. David and Dr. Khan, both of you learned the secret that strong women follow strong women. So Damon, what do you want to say about this topic?
Well, let me just first say I'm so honored to be here, Pat. Thank you so much for having me on this panel and this distinguished group of panelists. So a little bit about our company and then answer your question. We have about 14,000 employees in our company. Vast majority are what I call the frontline workers that do tremendous work, correctional officers or detention officers and their duties on running a prison or jail or detention center. It's probably shocking to this group that just over half of that workforce, which is probably about 10, 11 or 12,000 individuals, are women. So, we're in an industry that has a stereotype that this is an all male type industry. And we've tried to break that down. And I think we've been very effective on that. And this may be a tad provocative, but I'll just say it. What I've learned, especially for correctional officers, women are better communicators. We need the very best communicators on our front line of working with individuals that are going through really difficult, stressful, and traumatic path and journey. So that may be an obvious point, but it's really, really, I think, notable. So to the question, management team and board, a little different strategy on both. Management team, we try to build that leadership team from the ground up. So for those 11 or 12,000 correctional officers and half of them being women, I want them to be the next vice president. I want them to be the next head of HR or other functional area within an organization. And I think we've made good progress on that. We've got 3 women at our VP level, and I'm very proud as CEO. Our first 2 female named executive officers within my tenure. One was head of HR and one is head of real estate. And they were fantastic. And what was notable about those placements is they came from other parts of the organization. So the head of HR was in operations. The head of real estate came from government relations. And it was about a day of what in the world are you thinking, putting them in those positions? And then it was like, that makes a ton of sense. They're super talented, smart, and they have really proven themselves in both roles. The last thing I'll just say on the board side, I don't think we've used a headhunter in probably 20 years in recruiting board members. And so I try to play the long game. So it's, people like Pat that I, see in the local community and maybe local community or charitable boards. And I think, man, they'd be fantastic on our board. And then our most recent female director, an individual is fantastic, Stacia Hilton. She was a former director of the United States Marshal Service under President Obama. When I first met her in 2003, I knew I'd love to get her somehow in the organization. So that was a very long game. That took a while, but we got her on the board, and she's fantastic. And for all the points that have been made, it just adds so much richness, both at management level and the board level, to have that diversity. So thank you.
Thank you, Damon. I know you're women leaders, and they are some really dynamite people. Great choices. So Jonas or Matt, what are you thinking?
Well, I think a lot of the points that have been made by my esteemed panelists are, right on point. Making sure that you have, leaders, women across the board representing your organization, ensuring that there are opportunities for the up and coming women to feel like they can aspire and achieve in your culture. But some of it, though, too, Pat, is also taking a step back, and what I've tried to do in every environment I've been in. Some of it is living a life. And I've been around women my whole life. And I've come across women, the good, the bad, and the ugly, just like you find in any sort of, human being. And often, I would ask, if we were, starting this company, from ground zero, would the company be the way it is in terms of how we get work done, how we make decisions? And so to a large extent, what I tried to do is to change the paradigm and ensure that women are not, what I'm not interested in is a woman who, unless she wants to be, I don't need a woman who wants to be a guy. Right, and to live by the paradigms that men have defined as this is what you need to be, to be successful. How do we help women not just necessarily fit in, but to actually shape and create the kind of environment where they feel like they've had input in creating an environment that accommodates the variety of thoughts and differences that women bring to the party? And so some of that is the people whom I have on my team, the types of inputs that we garner as a team. Are we thinking and adding input, getting the right input to help reshape the way in which we get work done? And you'll be surprised just how much more creative, how much more productive, how differently we go about doing things. By just being able to change the paradigm around how we operate as a company. So for me, it's really been about ensuring that women feel empowered to shape the environments that they want to create versus, hey, figure out how to try to fit into this already defined environment that's been defined and created, for decades and centuries by men. And that takes I realize it's a different approach, but it takes a kind of a CEO who is open to questioning and trying to attract people who are motivated and curious and willing to be bold. Because throughout, one's career, I've met women who just go along, get along, be along, and operate the same way any other guy. It's just a guy in pants and a woman in a skirt, sort of. And what we don't want is a woman to feel as though she has to be like, a guy. Be you, and help to shape the environment that actually allows you and others like you to be successful. So I'm very much focused on that. Shape and create the environment that works best and accommodates a wide variety of types of folks. And I believe those things make us a much better organization.
Thank you. Thank you, Matt. We heard today and yesterday a couple of times a reminder that culture eats strategy, it eats policy, it eats planning, it eats everything for lunch. And including women to create the culture is really a fabulous way to build an organization that will retain brilliant women. So Jonas, bring us home on this one. What are you thinking about your best practices? What have you done?
I think in this great panel and for this great discussion, I think from my fellow panelists, you've really heard the three ingredients that we believe are necessary to move the needle on female participation at all levels of the company. You need a great culture conducive to inclusivity and diversity. You need the CEO's commitment, buy-in, and overt leadership, since it is a business strategy. And last but not least, you also need targets. And when I look back at my tenure, now almost a decade of being a CEO of a publicly listed company, I thought at the beginning that the fact that it's the right thing to do and that the business case is clear and positive in terms of women's participations at all levels, that in itself would, because it makes good sense, start to move the needle in the right direction. Turned out it didn't happen. And so when I looked at what needed to change, the first place to look, obviously, is you as a leader, me as a leader. What was I doing to making sure that this moved? And the realization that this was an important initiative, an important project amongst many. So when I elevated this as part of a business strategy, at ManpowerGroup, we employ hundreds of thousands of people across 75 countries every day. We understand the demographics and that women are an underused talent pool with tremendous potential in a world where the demographics in most developed countries and in most developing countries is stagnating. We need women to participate at all levels to see economic prosperity and growth. So we elevated, and I elevated this in terms of a strategy and made sure that we treated it as such. We added the targets that you need to measure the progress of a strategy. And that includes, knowing, of course, that we want to have senior and executive leadership being, as initial phase, 40% women. Overall, as a company, we need and want to have 50% representation of women. 56% of our women today are of our managers are women. And 40% of our board, up from 6 or 7 years ago, are women. So you used to say, to get something done, you need to measure it. That is true, but it's necessary, but not sufficient. You need to have targets. You need to measure them. You need to publicize them. You need to hold leaders accountable to them in terms of their compensation, as well as to the public eye. So we report all of these numbers publicly as part of our overall ESG and sustainability objectives. And the board holds me and sets these targets for myself and the management. They hold us accountable. And when those things came together, along with a culture of conscious inclusion, realizing what we need to do differently to create an environment where women can thrive at all levels, that's when we started to see a very significant shift. So, we know this is doable. We know what levers you need to pull to make sure that you can execute on the objectives that you have as part of this strategy. And we know that we're a much, much better company for it, and that we will compete and win in the market because of this strategy.
Brilliant, brilliant thinking, brilliant. Oh, that's fabulous. That was worth the price of admission. You are quite an ally. So I'm going to stay with you for a minute, because one of the things I wanted to hear, the WBC, we want to invite men into our work. I said that earlier. So what is it? Why are you, Jonas, such an ally for women? And what have you seen that's benefited you or benefited your company? What's been the outcome of your passion of supporting women in this way?
My first boss was a Chinese Malaysian business leader, Mrs. Ho Nyuk Chong. So, my whole life, I've had the benefit of working with extremely talented women and men. And I've seen that the mix, the diversity of thought that you can bring into a C-suite, into a management team, into any aspects of the business, where you have a great representation of very talented people, is and has been tremendous. Because we all have different perspectives, we all have different views of what can move the business forward. And I've lived this experience myself. As I mentioned, it was my first experience straight out of the business school in Malaysia. And ever since then, I've known that we always want to have, and that I always enjoy having colleagues that have diversity of thought. And I think increasingly important in a rapidly changing, disruptive environment, you need to have different views represented at all decision-making levels to run your business in the best way possible. So I think that's sort of my foundational belief, that this is a fantastic way of getting even better business results, and of course, a really high-performing organization.
We are really making progress when diversity and inclusion has moved from a strategy to a value to a belief. And I really appreciate you using the word belief. Thank you, Jonas. Who would like to go next? Talk to me about.
I'll jump in. Thanks, just
David.
because I just want to comment. It's the quote of the day, and I just have to say that, Jonas, CEOs need to have overt leadership in these areas. I just love that overt leadership, right? It's not just a passive, but in being aggressive about it. And I think that summarizes it so well. So thank you for that. Pat, I'll jump in on this. Like I mentioned before, the company's 37 years old this November, and for 30 of those years, we were located in Los Angeles. And Los Angeles, New York, Chicago, some of these big cities have a different approach to racial equity and gender equity, I think, than you would see in other parts of the country. And I think I was relatively blind-ish to the depths of the situation until I moved to Nashville, right? And Nashville, obviously, my eyes were very much opened to matters of racial inequality, being in the South, but also around gender inequality. And it was about a little over 5 years ago that the great Pat Shea commissioned our team to produce an anti-domestic violence piece for the YWCA called "We Are the Lions." And we launched that together. This piece, we launched it with YWCA and the UN Women. And a few weeks later, I was contacted by the UN and asked to participate in a panel on gender equality because of this piece that I had created with Steve Connell, spoken word artist. And so, I have to go to New York and go to the UN and speak to 1,500 delegates from all around the world with this panel of, experts on gender equality. And I'm thinking, why am I here? Right? It's like these people have dedicated their lives to this cause, and I'm here because I created this piece that I believe in, but I was relatively new to the game. So I was pretty intimidated by that. But I didn't necessarily feel like I had earned a spot at the table. So I had to really think about what is true for me. And I'm the father of 3 grown daughters, right? And I'm thinking, as a dad, what would I do? What would I not do to make sure that my daughters had all the same opportunities that anybody else, man, woman, gender fluid, and anybody else had in the world? What would I do, right? And as I look at my company, it made me look and realize and go, okay, all right. So am I treating all of the female employees, male employees, am I treating everybody the same? Am I making sure that there's opportunity for everybody inside of my company the same way I would make a path for my own daughters? And so that's how it became really personal for me, and made me shift in my thinking. So, in the results of that, you say, what were the benefits of that? Bigger vision, better communication, which has absolutely created a more sustainable and effective culture inside of the organization, which ultimately makes us more efficient. So that's my 2 cents.
That's David. That's great. And I just have to give him a shout out. That small little piece he did for me had over 10 million views, probably now 12 million on the internet. So it was quite a successful, creative way to end violence against women and girls. So Matt, what are you thinking? Why is being an ally a passion of yours? And where have you seen the benefits for you or your company?
Well, it starts really with how I grew up. Growing up in working class Boston, I had a variety of friends from different backgrounds, and women were part of my friend group. And as such, I learned a lot of different things from them, and as well as others, attributes and characteristics that I wanted to emulate. And so it really started with the sense that, gee, if Jenny over here is somebody whom I knew, I grew up with, whom I had a great deal of respect for and looked up to, is being denied an opportunity because she's a woman, I find it unconscionable. And so it started there. And recognizing that people like a Jenny or whomever, Keisha, whomever it may have been, would be not given that. I felt it's a mission, it's a passion, it's something that I feel totally committed to. That how could we deny folks like this an opportunity because they are a woman? So to some extent, Pat, it starts with attitude, values. What kind of person are you? That you would walk into an environment and not be able to see, not be, I don't think we can use that as an excuse any longer. We have to be curious minded. We have to be intentional. We have to, if you're sitting around a table and all the people sitting around the table are white males, does it prompt you to at least ask a question like, gee, are there any other people that you may have considered to sit around this table? And if your answer is that you didn't even think about it, then you're the problem. And therefore, then we got to go get on you. And not in a way that's shaming you, but it's like, hey man, have your team over here. You got a lot of folks on your team who could be helping us that we haven't even brought to the table. So it starts with attitude, values, and the people whom I grew up with, and there were a wide variety of them, and women whom I had a great deal of respect for. And I want to be, and I have been, an ally to ensure that women whom I knew in my life, who I knew could do the job better than I can do the job, or who can help me help us, that I want to make sure that those folks are being given a fair shot in life. It's just a thing in me about unfairness that just I can't allow it. I got to speak up on it. And so that's where it comes from, Pat.
Perfect. Thank you. That was a great story. I really appreciate you sharing that. Damon or Dr. Khan?
I'll take it. Look, again, I'm going to go back to some examples to illustrate the point. I've served in 3 roles. Currently, I served on the board of directors of Spectrum Health, a large health system. I currently serve on the board of Reckitt Benckiser, $60 billion market cap British company. And of course, as I mentioned, I served as vice chairman, and I'm going to give you very quick examples in all 3. When Spectrum Health needed to appoint a new CEO, we as a board got together, picked the best candidate we could. Happened to be Tina, who's a woman, one of the few women running a large health system. COVID hit, and Tina did a fantastic job of steering Spectrum Health. It's dozens of hospitals, thousands of physicians navigating COVID in Michigan and across the upper Midwest. Not an easy task, we all know that. However, she had the skills, it was the right decision, we backed her. So why am I passionate? One proof point, history, experience keeps telling us that. The second, and you had Indra Nui talk earlier, Indra was my chairman who recruited me to PepsiCo, and when she said, she had coined this term, performance with purpose, little did I know that she was going to hand it to me and say, Mehmood, you're going to chair this across the world and build a team around this in addition to your quote day job. Tough task. You've got a company like PepsiCo operating in 198 countries, hundreds of thousands of employees, and billion-dollar brands, dozens of them, right? You know the story. And now to take them into sustainability, water, energy, packaging across the world, I picked a woman, and I picked a woman to lead that for me, to bring the other business teams together. One, because she listened. Second, she was firm. And third, I'm a firm believer, you've got to give your best talent the toughest assignment and then back them. And by doing that, you send a strong message. Everybody knows who's behind the candidate. It's going to get done. The stick is always there, but you rarely want to use the stick. The organization knows that. And of course, the rest is history. You'll read some of it in Indra's book. You heard Indra's comments around it, but we were able to transform PepsiCo into the very different company it is today. The third example I'm going to give you is when Reckitt Benckiser needed to hire a global head of R&D, I worked with the CEO to go out and recruit the right candidate. And the third, in that example, also, the global head of R&D today, for the first time in its history, is a woman. And so each one of these, I've both actively been involved in recruiting, helping appoint, or directing them. Second, I've seen the business results. And so I'm going to conclude by saying this is not for me, one of those nice things and all the rest of it. I don't count numbers. I go out for the best talent, give them the best assignments. And it might be you end up with, you've got 9 people, 3 are women, 4 are women. In my case, it was the majority became women. So our C-suite, it was the men who were the minority. And it wasn't because that's what we started doing. We were appointing the best candidates we could find from wherever they are in the world. And the last thing is in my new job, we're about to launch this global, very large foundation doing research across the world, taking on major disease challenges. My first senior most appointee is actually a woman. So it's worked for me several times, not because it's the right thing to do, because they'll deliver as well as any guy. I'm not saying either is better. You got to get the best talent. There is a talent war. And while there are a lot of people looking for jobs, there's very few candidates who fit those senior posts, which are going to require tough leaders.
Thank you, Dr. Khan. You have quite a reputation in the world of business, but I have to tell you, when I was working with your staff in preparation for today, the way that those women spoke to me about you, I was very excited to get to meet you and to hear your story. So thank you. So Damon, what are you thinking about? Why is being an ally so important to you? And what benefits have you seen?
Oh, this discussion is so good. I'm taking a lot of notes here, Pat. So again, thank you for having me on this panel. First part first, let me just say two groups of individuals really influenced me to be an ally of women. First is my wife, my mom, and then my mom's mom, my grandmother, all professional women who have done amazing things and during their career, and just to see kind of firsthand their leadership and what they were able to do in their respective professions and vocations. This is really inspiring to me. So I'd say number one. Number two, when I moved to Nashville in '95, coming from Kansas, Leavenworth, Kansas, which has a lot of correctional facilities at the federal and state level, it was kind of a foreign idea having a female be an warden of a prison. When I moved to Nashville with the company, and I give credit to my leadership team that was in place back in the '90s, we had like 5 women that were wardens of prisons. And not only were they doing great work for us as a company, but they were national voices on corrections. They were raising the bar on quality and standards and accreditation, and speaking to opportunities and leadership development opportunities, I should say, for women in the profession, not just for our company. So I'd say those two groups are what makes me think about this all the time. The last part of your question, let me just say the benefits, a lot of that has been covered, but let me, I guess, dig in just to one piece that's been touched on by several of the panelists, and that is, if you look for the best talent, and it's for women, but I've also had this conversation with men too, is to say, don't pigeonhole yourself in a certain area of the business. So if you're in operations, you can be effective in HR. If you're in HR, you can be effective in our legal team. And when I first got into this role, there was a lot of conversations I had to say, this person is the best person for this role. And I'll again go back to Beth Mayberry, who's head of our real estate. But she was in government relations. Well, she's only been in government relations, but she is our best talent. Every big, hairy issue, problem, and challenge we give to her, she delivers and she makes it happen. And she's a tremendous leader of people, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I'm really, really proud of the fact now, I think we've got a culture that we think about when we got a role filled. We don't think about, well, it's only got to be in that vocation, in that area. They could be from anywhere in the enterprise. And if it's a woman, then absolutely put them in, if they're the best talent, put them in that role immediately. And we've been well served with that. The last thing I'll just say is a benefit, and you touched on this, I think, in the very part of your comments, Pat, and that is putting people in these roles, both women in the management roles, but also the board level. It just brings more. I mean, so we've got more people kind of going through the organization who want to aspire to leadership level. And Pat, you actually have helped with this, but I think in the last 2 years, I think I've had 4 or 5 women knock on my door saying, "Hey, I'd love to join your board." And that's fantastic because, historically it's always been men. But if I've got someone externally that's looking at our culture, looking at our business, looking at our mission, looking at the board makeup, and looking at our management team, saying, "Hey, I want to be part of that team," that's pretty dang fantastic, flattering. But I feel like we're doing something right. So thank you.
Thank you, Damon. That's great. I love how you don't define positions by gender at all. And I know that about your reputation in our community. So I'm going to throw a question out, and I would just like your first response. As I mentioned, we want to invite men into the work of the Women's Business or Women's Business Collaborative. But I have found that many men, though supportive of women, don't see themselves as an ally. They're not really stepping into that sponsor role or that champion role. They're not thinking that they need to amplify and advocate. How can we best invite men, good men who are really believe the same things that you gentlemen believe? How do we invite them in? How do we get them to commit to be allies and join us on this work for diversity and gender parity?
Let me throw one out, Angie. Look, I'm a scientist, as you obvious. Let me give you a scary statistic for the United States. 50% of all industry-based scientists in every industry in this country are over the age of 50. In the next decade, half of the entire country's scientific workforce is going to be retirement eligible. You got to do 2 things. You got to find every scientist you can to keep innovation and technology going for this, because this country is built on technology and innovation. It doesn't matter which industry you're in. The second, it's been the powerhouse, right? The second part of that is it's going to be men who are going to be helping getting creative in shaping that workforce. Quick example. A lot of women finish undergrad, come into the science workforce, have a family, and can't finish graduate school. So at PepsiCo, we went to Rutgers and said, we've got labs, you can grant PhDs. What if my female scientists stay in the lab, work in our labs on projects and work on their PhD with you? We'll give them the time to do it. The first batch is ready to graduate. They never left the workforce. Now they can graduate on and with a doctorate move on in their career. It's going to have to be guys, not because it's the right thing to do, because in 10 years from now, if you're a science leader, you won't have scientists to hire. I don't care which agency you go to, whatever you do, because half the workforce will have retired. And we can't fill it with immigration because the countries we used to take them from, China, India, needs those technologists for their own economy. How are you going to solve the problem? It's very simple. You're going to have to change your ways, and it's going to take the men and the women working together to fill that gap. To me, there's no better argument.
Great suggestion. Thank you, Dr. Khan. I love the idea of just showing them the data that they need to see a change has to occur. Other ideas on how to invite men into allyship?
Yeah, I'm gonna go from scientist to creative guy, right? So very, very different perspective, right? Because for me, I think is it marketing, right? How does the WBC really get their message out to men? Because and again, this is my opinion. I don't have stats, right? But my gut is that I think there are a lot of men out there that go, "What? There's parity. That's fine, right?" But what's the issue? Women have jobs, and they don't realize the level and the disparity that exists. So for me, it's how does WBC and organizations like this amplify the message in a way that can be received by men that turn the light bulb on to get more men to join in to the process. So that is, it may be oversimplified, but that's what I see could really help the mission is like, how do we amplify the message?
David, you just sounded like a scientist, man.
I love it. I love it. Jonas, what are you thinking about this? How do we invite more men in?
I think, all of the men that you're thinking about, generally, I believe are in favor of, better representation. So I don't think they would argue with that. I think they would be impressed by the data. And it may give them, more impetus, and especially in times like these, when you can see talent shortages, abound, a lot of companies and operations know that, it's very difficult to find people. So to access and to attract women in from the talent pool into the organization is going to be a business necessity. I would argue there are two components that are important. One is that you are making it part of your business strategy. It's not to do good. It is clearly to run the business better, but you have to elevate it as a component of a strategy. And I think, and I'm only speaking from my own, own experience, when I didn't do that, and it was part of an overall strategic initiative that was important, like the other 25, then, things are moving along, but they are sort of not moving at speed, at scale, and with intentionality. When you elevate this to a point where you say to Dr. Khan's, as well as to David's point, that, hey, the data is pretty clear. If we don't have good representation, we won't attract great female talent at all levels. This is going to be a business issue for us. So we need to really make sure that we move the needle faster so women feel that this is a company where they can work and they can succeed. I think that is a very important part. The other part is this notion that we all have a bias. And I see myself as completely unbiased, but left to my own devices, I am sure that I would love to, to recruit mostly guys that like playing hockey and have a slight tinge of a Swedish accent from where, their native country. So we all have biases. The trick is to be aware of the biases and what behaviors convey that bias and create mechanisms so that you don't let the bias overtake in your selection processes at all levels. So we make sure as a mechanism always to have a diverse slate for our recruitment. So you have to have a diverse slate and you have to have a diverse interview panel. Mm-hmm. The idea that you're going to be attracting great female talent into the company, and you're going to circulate this talent to 3 male leaders to constitute the interview panel sort of defeats the purpose. You're not showcasing that. So we make sure that we have both of those always covered so that we can try and counter what men and women may express differently. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't, but at least we've covered that angle to make sure that we are not exhibiting unconscious bias, but rather that we're consciously including all aspects of the talent that we're interviewing.
Thank you, Jonas. So we are almost out of time. I only have about a minute. Damon, Matt, is there 1 or 2 words you want to say?
This is an obvious point, but lead by example. So
Lead
if you
by
make
example.
if you make it important, then other male leaders will see it's important and they'll follow the lead.
Thank you. Matt, what about you?
I would say that I think things have changed so rapidly. I think men are more vulnerable and maybe more concerned in reaching out because it could be interpreted differently. And so I think some recognition where women can actually help men help themselves to help women move over the chasm. I think there are a lot of men, I hear it from guys, I'm not gonna go in that room with Pat because it could be perceived as something different. And I think we have to recognize that we live in an environment now, rightly or wrongly, that there are men who are maybe holding back and saying that I may put myself in a compromised situation. Not that they're right. I think it's something we have to recognize. And how do we get more men to be able to feel confident in helping women and not feel like there's going to be retribution?
Thank you, Matt. I appreciate all of your time today. You guys have been fabulous. Your words are inspirational. I will be back in touch as we continue to develop our Ally of Her program and initiative. I just want to close with this thought. If you're a man and you're listening today, please join us. If you know a man, if you know a good guy, invite him to the table. We want to have more allies because we know alone we are amazing. But we also know together we will be better and we will go further faster. Thank you, everybody. Have a great day. Gwen, it's all yours. Take it away.
Thank you.
We're overwhelmingly committed to promoting the WBC's gender and equality objectives. I, in addition to our leadership team, have dedicated our efforts to driving our collective objectives throughout the entire staffing industry. We're making great strides. We're becoming stronger together. And our initiatives are being recognized and adopted by the customers the staffing industry supports. We live this every day.